only do this pretty much for the first test, because after that, after you've had one test under your belt, you have a good idea of how I would ask an objective question. There'll be other 25 or 30 questions. If there are 30, then there will be a built-in curve. You'll be responsible for only 25 of those. But in any case, you want to answer all of the ones that are asked. And, you know, there's some strategies to multiple choice. So, you know, somebody just came in. Just get one off the top of the desk. And if somebody needs the questions, the question pool or the review sheet, which I gave out last time, those are also there. Okay, well, this will give you an idea of some of the different types of multiple choice questions I might ask. How many? Okay. So this one says, according to Martin Luther King, an unjust law. A is any law which conflicts with a given society's moral code. Anybody have A for that one? Okay. Okay. Well, B is any law that is out of harmony with the moral law or the law of God. How many had B? Okay. Well, 2 people will admit to having had B. Is any law that a particular individual, such as himself, feels as unjust? Anybody have C? What about D? None of the above. Now, sometimes there will be questions where the correct answer is none of the above. Here it is one of the above, and the folks who said they had B are right. And you'll see that's basically from the list of things that we went over when we went over this reading from, you know, the from, okay, from the reading, the letter from a Birmingham jail. And, you know, let me remind you, if for some reason you don't have the book, that reading is there in supplementary readings in Blackboard. Okay. Number 2. We saw, pardon? I said it was B. So you were right if you had B. So number 2, Aristophanes criticized Socrates for how many had A, being a nature philosopher. Okay, no votes for A. What about B, being a master of verbal trickery? How about C, having his head in the clouds? Okay, we got some votes for C. What about D, all the above? Okay, so in this one, the all the aboves have it. And, you know, that indicates something that you need to do, right? Don't just rush through it so fast that you look at it and you say, Aristophanes criticized Socrates for A. Oh, being a nature philosopher. Yes, he did. Circle A, move on. And you don't read the other options. You want to make sure that even if you're sure it's A, read the other options and make sure that it isn't all the above, because it may be A, but also B and C. Okay, so you want to look at all the options. Number 3, I want to say, is there anybody who didn't have C for number 3? So, some of them are going to be easy questions. You know, a good test has a mixture of questions of various difficulty levels. That's one thing that lets you separate out the A's from the C's. But some of them are going to be pretty straightforward, right? We know Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. But again, suppose you didn't know that. Well, or number one, suppose you didn't know B was correct. Well, part of the strategy, and I'm sure most of you know this by now, so I'm just reminding you of something that you already know. Part of the strategy of doing a multiple choice test where your chances of getting it right are 1 out of 4 or 25% is to try to eliminate options. And I always let people mark on, even though all of your answers are going to be done on a Scantron form, so you want to bring a number 2 pencil and make sure you buy at least one Scantron form for the bookstore, from the bookstore. Your chances of getting it right on a true false are 50%. But if you can eliminate 2 options, I mean, look at question number 1. You say, well, boy, I'm not sure if it's any of these. But is any law that conflicts with a given society's moral code? But that would mean that segregationist laws are automatically just. So how is that the kind of thing that Martin Luther King is arguing? No, I think I can eliminate A. And I don't know about B, well, what about C? Is any law that a particular individual, like King himself, feels is unjust? Is he saying that whatever we feel is unjust? No, I mean, he's got a broader, more objective view of what makes a law unjust. So the point is, if you could eliminate A or C, you could say, well, it's either B or it's D. And even if you didn't know that, now you're down, your odds are 50% of getting it right. I think some people, they look at a multiple choice question. I'm sure this is the case with some students. And if they don't immediately know the answer, like something in 3, oh yeah, Socrates definitely said the unexamined life is not worth living. Circle C, I know that one. But if they look at a question like 1 and they just don't know it, they want to throw their hands up and just circle anything. But again, if you try to read the options, and a multiple choice question is not a question that is just designed to test your memory, but it's also made to exercise your reasoning abilities on things you've already learned. And if you, instead of throwing your hands up, oh, I don't know what the answer is to A, if you read the options, you might remember some things that enable you to at least narrow it down. And remember, this is not like the GRE or the SAT where we're deducting, a percentage of your wrong answers. There's no penalty for guessing wrong. Okay, but you want to eliminate options. Okay, so number 4, in the allegory of the cave, the philosophy student is represented by A. Anybody? Nobody had A, right? Pretty obviously not A. What about B, the prisoner was led up out of the cave? What about C, all the prisoners? How about D, only the prisoners wise enough to stay behind in the cave? Well, nobody wants to volunteer, but here, of course, it's the prisoner who was led up out of the cave. That's the person who's taken the philosophical journey toward enlightenment toward true knowledge for Plato. You know,
What did we do for 3?
and well, 3 is not worth living. Okay. So 4 is B as in boy. 5. Now, there's a reason why, in order to get into med school, and I said this before, what do you have to get to pass a class in med school? You got to get a C, right? In fact, medical students use this formula, C equals MD. I mean, there's a joke among med students, right? What do you call somebody who goes through the whole of med school and gets nothing but C's in every class he takes? Pardon?
Mediocre.
No, the correct answer is doctor. In other words, that's all you have to do. But why do they require people to get A's going in? It's not just that competition is that's tough, but a lot of the, I mean, I know this anecdotally from medical students. I was never a med student. But a lot of their tests are what are called multiple choice. Say you got 6 options, A through E. You know, the first question might be A, C, and D. The next option might be A, D, and E. The other one might be A, B, C, and E. Multiple choice, and you can see right off that would be a very hard test, right? It's not just knowing one right answer, but it's knowing which combination of 3 different options is the right combination. So I don't do too many of those, but occasionally I'll do one with both B and C, or both C and D, or neither C and D. So 5 is one of those kind, right? The released prisoner comes to realize that what he saw before was A, true reality. Were the shadows true reality? Anybody have A? Okay. What about B? Only a poor copy of true reality. Were the shadows only a poor copy of true reality? Well, you say, well, of course they were. So, is it B? Well, might be. But what about the value of what passed for wisdom back in the cave for the released prisoner once he's enlightened, once he knows the truth, once he knows what reality is and knows that the shadows are only a copy of reality? Does he value what passed for wisdom and knowledge in the cave? No. So you say, well, wait a second, it's B, but it's also C. But D says both B and C. So there's only one correct answer here, which is D. Yeah. Yeah, and that's correct. So, good for you if you had that. Then you're doing well on this kind of a test. But again, so read all the options. Sometimes I'll word these kind like A, B, both A and B, neither A nor B, or something like that. But there aren't going to be a lot like 5, but watch out that there could be. So, okay, true, false, as you all know the drill for Scantron tests, right? A equals true, B equals false, right? So, 6, like like Socrates, Martin Luther King maintained that we have no right to resist the will of the state, even if it punishes us unjustly. Was that his view? No, so that would be false, right? Um, 7, Socrates could not help but admit that Aristophanes' portrait of him in the clouds, remember that was Aristophanes' satirical play about Socrates, that his portrait was amazingly accurate. Did Socrates think that Aristophanes got him right or wrong? So how many had true? How many had false? That's correct. It's false, right? In fact, scholars think that one of the reasons why Plato wrote some of his early dialogues, the Meno, the Phaedo, the Crito, the Apology, was to try to set the record straight because of the misinformation, on who Socrates was, because of the misinformation that was out there at the time. Number 8, Socrates maintained that we have no more right to use violence against our country than a child has to use violence against its parents. How many put true? Okay, some truths. How many had false? Well, the truths have it here, right? Because he views the state as being like a parent to him, but that he is not on the same level as the state. Just like a child is not on the same level as a parent. And so if a parent punishes a child unjustly, he says the child has no right to strike out against the parent. And so he doesn't have any right to strike out against the state, even if it punishes him unjustly. Yeah, you had a hand up?
Yes, I was saying that number 2 answers number 7. Like if you know 2 to be correct with leaving all of the above, and you see the piece with Socrates being criticized, and you come down to number 7, and you see the piece about the head in the clouds, you know it's false because it's true. So that helps you answer another question.
Yeah, and that's a very good point about these kinds of. Remember, you were probably instructed, if you don't know one of the multiple choice questions, skip it and come back to it. And you will have plenty of time, right? This is the only thing we will do Wednesday besides handing in your take-home essay. On a piece of paper, don't want to see emails, and it's not an assignment to be submitted in Blackboard. It's do this the old-fashioned way, and I'm actually going to grade it using one of these things. It's called a pen. It's called a red pen, right? And so no, but you point up a good thing. Part of the strategy, as well as eliminating options, is skip a question, and your memory may be jogged by something else that you read farther down the line that when you go back to. That's one reason why you want to go back over the test, when you do it. Something may jog your memory. But again, for changing things, for every right answer, for every wrong answer that is changed to a right answer, usually I see about 2 where somebody changes a right answer to a wrong answer. So if you think you got it wrong, make pretty sure before you change it. There are Freudian reasons why your subconscious sometimes helps you pick the right one. Yeah, go ahead.
One more thing. I took a test taking class, and she showed us.
Well, that's no fair.
Yeah, so she told us to cover the multiple choice portion up and just read the question, and automatically the answer is going to populate in your mind. Whatever you say in your mind and you look at it, that's the answer. But of course, make sure that you read out the whole choice.
That's a good, yeah.
It's almost like
that's a very good hint.
You get it right when you do it.
Very good hint. Yeah. So those people do those. Okay, so again, I usually do this just with the first test, but you know, after that, you've seen what I do to, an objective test. There'll be either 25 or 30 questions. I haven't finished it yet. If there are 30 questions, you'll be responsible for only 25, so there'll be like a built-in curve. If there are 25 questions, then I'll just do a curve.
What if you get all of them?
So,
Right?
well, well, basically, it's like money in the bank. Then, I mean, if there are 30 questions, then in theory you could do as well as 110 points on a 100-point
So you do the extra.
test. Well, it would be like, yeah. Well, that's a separate thing. But that there is an extra credit folder. You will be allowed to do up to 2 extra credit things. Since we're on the topic, what's the difference between a quiz, a 10-point quiz that you get 10 out of 10 on, and 10-point and an assignment that's 10 points extra credit? Or is there any difference? Well, I use a total point system, right? So your grade will be a ratio of the number of points you earn total versus the total points that are possible. So there's a numerator and a denominator, right, in what figures out your grade, right? Well, in a 10-point quiz, yeah, 10 points may be added to your numerator because you got 10 out of 10, but since that quiz counted, 10 points will be added to the denominator, right? What your score is divided by. In an extra credit, if it's 10 points extra credit, 10 points gets added to the numerator, but nothing extra gets added to the denominator. That's why it can make a significant difference. Doing those 2 extra credits can make the difference of up to 3 points in your final average. You say, well, what's 3 points out of 100? Well, what if you got, an 86, right? And I'm not going to give an A to somebody with an 86 average. But what if your extra credit knocks you up to an 89? Usually, you don't have to have 90 on the nose. If you had an 89, you'd get an A. And if somebody's on the borderline, whether it's A, B, B, C, or whatever, first thing I looked at is, well, did they try to help themselves out by doing any of the extra credits? But that's another thing. But, so some good comments. Now, let me say a few things. I went through with a fine-tooth comb some of the things. I'm going to go through some of these Crito arguments. Again, remember, let's see if I have it. I have it, no I don't. But, okay, remember, for this portion of the allegory of the cave, remember in handouts, course documents, subfolder handouts, there is a very detailed handout on the meanings of the allegory of the cave that will enable you to fill in stuff. Now, for some reason, I took out what I normally put in a review sheet is, you're not going to be asked exactly these questions, but if you know how to answer them, you'll be well prepared for the questions that are going to be asked, okay? So look at that review sheet and it'll answer all the stuff you see there. And again, I go over this. I uploaded an older review session and I go over that in a lot of detail. In the Crito, you want to focus on the main arguments that have as their conclusion, I should not escape. Because those are the main arguments he uses. So he says, if I escape, then I harm another. He looks at the state and harming the state as if it were harming another individual. And he says there's this moral principle that I shouldn't do intentional harm to another person. So because escaping would harm another, he says I shouldn't escape. He relates to the state as if it were not only another human being, but a parent. You know, the laws of the state enabled his parents to get married. He grew up, was educated under the laws of the state. So if the state is like a parent to me, then if I escape, it would be like disobeying a parent. And he says, well, the state is like a parent to me, therefore I shouldn't escape. Now, you want to know the basics of this. I'm not asking you to remember, you know, every step of the argument put in this formal form, right? If you take one of our logic courses, we'll talk about what these forms are, you know. But so he says it would be like disobeying a parent, but also, remember Socrates, and we had this earlier question, thinks that we're not on the same level with our parent, and so even if a parent punishes us unjustly, we have no right to strike back against them. Now, the last one, remember Socrates never signed an agreement to obey the laws of Athens, but because he voluntarily lived in the city, he says, I'm under an implied agreement to obey those laws. And so he says, if I escape, then I would break my implied agreement with Athens to obey its laws, respect the verdict of its courts. So he says, and I should not break my agreements, therefore I shouldn't escape. So these are some of the arguments he uses in the Crito. And I don't have anything specifically on the letter from a Birmingham jail, but the letter itself is there in supplementary readings. And, you know, look at the notes for that day when we put the characteristics of a just versus an unjust law, or look where he discusses that, either in your book or in the other part. What you see here, okay, is what you would get from the PowerPoint on Aristotle's Ethics if you printed it out in the outline mode. All right. So, I mean, the things, and I go through this in more detail in that recorded lecture, but, you know, we saw that Aristotle claims that we don't have to have all these virtues at birth, that virtuous character traits can be developed by practice, just like skill at playing a musical instrument. But we develop them in real social interaction with other individuals, not by going off and meditating on courage or meditating on self-control. You know, we don't become moral or morally just in isolation, but by actually performing just actions. So remember, for him, as I put it on the blackboard, it's like a circle. We perform just actions like we perform courageous actions. They help develop the quality, the character trait of courage in us. But then after we have that developed, it becomes easier for us in the future to act in accordance with those character traits. So when we've developed more courage, then it becomes easier for us to choose to do courageous actions. Now, I said when we went over this that where Aristotle pushes the envelope, broke new ground in philosophy, was in this general definition of a virtue. For him, it's not vice at one end, virtue at the other, but the virtuous choice is the middle ground between two vices. One, a vice of deprivation, the other, a vice of excess. And you can see them here, and these virtues are also summarized. So you can see that self-control is the midway point between denying the needs of your body, or gluttony and drunkenness on the other hand, excess, overindulging in food and drink. And the virtue is temperance, self-control, walking the middle ground. Same with courage. Total fear we know is cowardice, and that's not a virtue. But neither for Aristotle is total fearlessness. It just leads to foolhardiness. So we achieve the mean using our rational abilities. For Aristotle, our reasoning abilities are what make us different from any other living thing on earth as human beings. Now, that's a controversial way to define humanity, but I don't have time to go off on that tangent. But even later, philosophers like Immanuel Kant in the 19th century thought we could draw a sharp line between human beings and every other living thing, especially as it relates to moral obligations as a use of reason. So I do not have anything on Plato's theory of reality here. So you want to look over that PowerPoint on the forums. I think I discussed some of that in that recorded lecture, but again, there's a recorded, there are two lectures that cover that entire Plato on the forums PowerPoint. But yeah, you had a question?
I'm lost right here. How are we answering this with the deprivation, mean, and access? The mean is the middle point?
Yes, the mean is the.
Okay.
In other words, for courage, it's the middle ground between fearing everything and fearing nothing. But it's having fear but controlling it rationally. That's courage for him. For temperance, it's not a total denial, it's not asceticism, a total denial of the needs of our body for food, drink, and sex. But neither is it becoming a sexaholic or a drunkard or a glutton. On the other hand, that's a vice of excess. The other vice is a vice of deprivation, but he says it's recognizing we have these desires, but moderating them.
But I'm saying, how are we putting the answers, the blank, is this a blank space in between? Are we supposed to fill in those blanks right there?
No, well, okay, remember, this is a review sheet.
I'm just saying, if you do a test like this, I'm not going to understand.
Well, there won't be, well, I mean, this is in the PowerPoint, and it's made to illustrate how he defines various virtues, like temperance, like courage, generosity for him is the midway point between being an Ebenezer Scrooge and not giving at all, or going overboard on the other hand and being generous to a fault where you hurt yourself. For him, the virtue of generosity is found in between those extremes. So that's why I'm saying this general model of virtue be, on the one hand, there's a vice of deprivation, at the other extreme, a vice of excess, and virtue is the mean. That's what, and so, you know,
I just only saw 2 slots, so I just thought it would be like three
uh-huh.
spaces, the middle.
Yeah. Well, you might look at how it's actually portrayed. This is a printout of it, but you know, gives you most of the information. Now, remember, for him, the reward of morality comes in this life, not in knowing the form of the good better in the intellectual world after death. For Aristotle, virtue is its own reward. His answer to the question, well, why should I be moral, is you will live a happier, more satisfying life. I mean, basically, eudaimonia is not just happiness like, oh boy, I'm happy today, but it's like a general sense of well-being. Life is good, you know. Yeah. I'm just about to stop this and do that. So. So, and again, the theological argument, there will be some questions on that. I don't mention it here because that's the most recent thing we did, but there's a recording on Blackboard.